In this section, we're going to be discussing Baltic history. And when we discuss the Baltic history, again, we have a tendency to take modern notions and then place them on the past. And we're going to try and be careful in this unit not to project a modern-day Estonian state or Latvian state into the past, because there wasn't such a thing. And modern nationalism of the 19th century often demands to describe history in a way that maybe shows a unified era in the past, or an era where there was a singularity when it came to peoples and such. The truth of the Baltics, like most of Central and Eastern Europe, is that it was a diverse region and there were many people migrating in and out of this area. The first settlements go back 13,000 years or so. The first permanent settlement somewhere around 8,000 years ago, and these were by Finno-Ugric tribes. And as I mentioned earlier in another video, the Finno-Ugric tribes had a language group that developed into modern-day Finnish and Estonian, and there's still some surviving tribes out there in Estonia as well. The Sami tribes and the Suomi tribes, and again, these are some peoples that have maybe distinct dialects of this region. So where did the Finno-Ugric people come from? They came from somewhere in the Urals at some point. They headed north a few thousand, 8,000, 10,000 years ago. Those tribes, that language group, separates into two groups, the Finnish branch and the Ugric branch. Finnish branch is Finnish, Estonian, Sami, Lap, these kinds of languages. And the Ugric branch is languages like Hungarian and Ostyak, and these are some languages that are still spoken in the Ural Mountains today of Russia. The Baltic speakers, so when we talk about the modern-day Lithuanians or Latvians, they arrived somewhere around 14th century BCE, and there was, of course, intermigration in these areas, and we see loan words throughout the region and expressed by a lot of different people in the area. So basically, when we talk about the language groups, these are the major language groups, but it's not the only languages that were in this area. And as I discussed the history, we got to remember that there were other people in this region for a very long time, and they also have a great influence. So although on the map you see Estonia is full of Estonians who maybe speak Estonian, the truth is much more complicated than that, and we got to keep that in mind for all of these nations in East Central Europe. These tribes had very little historical kind of impact on Europe, and not really noted much until Roman times. They were in terms of doing fur trade and amber trade, and we really don't see them much in history, again, in terms of historical writings and such, until the Middle Ages. And in the Middle Ages, in the early Middle Ages, during the Viking attacks of the 9th through 11th centuries, there are recordings of these Esti people from Estonia and different language groups being attacked in the Baltics. The first major incursion against these groups from a more western source is by the Teutonic Knights. And the Teutonic Knights were German crusaders who, once they were in Jerusalem, were invited in 1226 to head north, far north that is, to the area which is much of northern Poland today and Kaliningrad. They were invited to crusade against the pagans, and especially the Lithuanians in that region. And they fought very hard against the Prus, who later become the Prussians, which this area gets named at one point. And the Prussians were fully dominated and assimilated, and their language survived probably to the 17th or 18th century. We actually have dictionaries converting German to Prussian, and that was not going to last. However, Prussian dies out as a language, and some of the other languages of that region also die out eventually as well. And this is something that truly affects the people of this region today. It's one of their great fears, that if their language dies out, then they themselves die out. And again, this is part of the mythology of nationalism, which we'll be touching upon this whole unit. So the Teutonic Knights, they formed some major cities, Danzig, and later Königsberg, which becomes Kaliningrad. And they then unite with other Christianization forces in the region farther north, with the Livonian Order. And most of the Baltics from the 13th century to the 16th century is known as Livonia. And Livonia also was a Baltic language. But the Livonian Order was a group that united with the Teutonic Knights, and they therefore answer to the Pope. And so this region is really controlled by Christian forces that come to de-paganize the area. And with this Germanization and Christianization of the area, there's an influence on who's in control and who has power, of course, and of these languages itself. So German is a major force of the Baltics, and the Germans, who were once part of the Teutonic Order and then again unite with the Livonian Order, establish German as the language of trade in much of this region. And German gentry and such are those who will control this region really all the way through to the 20th century. So at different times there are different forces in the region who expand their empires, but German landholders retain their control during this time period. And the German barons really controlled the cities and the towns, and owned serfs. The peasants, they're going to be freed later, but the Germans dominated this region. And Prussia is eventually going to form as a duchy under the control of the Poles and others at different time periods. So you're going to have this intermingling constantly of Germans in the region, though. And who else is in the region? Well, there are Russian fishermen, especially up in the Estonian northeastern regions. There's a large lake called Lake Peipus, which is the fifth largest lake in all of Europe, as a matter of fact. And there's going to be Russian settlers again who are going to make a wave towards this area in the 17th and 18th centuries. There's a division in the Orthodox Church of Russia, and there's a group called the Old Believers, and they seek refuge in Estonia, in that region of Estonia. And Estonia, too, is divided at different times. At some points, it's part of the Livonian Order. When the Livonian Order was first established, the very top end of modern-day Estonian was controlled by the Danes. And this is later going to change into Swedish control in the 17th century. And that's going to last until the 18th. And in the next section, I'll talk a little bit about that.